4th of February to order. Our agenda today is to work 3 different bills. We will start out with Senate Bill 178, which was the providing for trust company charter conversions. Does anyone feel like they would like Eileen to give us a review on that? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to pass the bill out favorably, then we can have discussions and consider amendments. Olson moves. Is there a second? Peck seconds. Thank you. Discussion. I do know that in OSBC's testimony that they pointed out that they had missed a word. So I have an amendment to clean that up. Well, the chair didn't give himself. Okay. Committee, as you can see on line 31, we are just inserting the word state with this balloon. Any questions on the balloon? None. Is there a motion on the balloon? Gossage moves. Olson seconds. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Additional discussion or amendments on Senate Bill 178? I see none. Is there an amendment to pass it? Is there a motion to pass it out as amended favorably? Senator Olson. Senator Peck seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Mr. Chair.
Eileen?
I'm so sorry. I could not unmute myself. There's actually, do you see the second page of the amendment? Did I
do now.
May I go ahead and explain it?
Please do.
Okay, so the OSBC had noted that originally in Senate Bill 178, they just added trust company to the same naming convention as state banks. But as it turns out, trust companies have different requirements for their names when they convert to state trusts. And so what ends up happening is that in line on page 1 in line 31, I'm just specifying that it's a state.
Eileen, you muted again.
Sorry, I accidentally hit the space bar. On page 2 in line 2, the requirements for the name of a state trust is that the state trust company shall be, the name selected shall be different or substantially dissimilar from any other trust company doing business in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Committee, are there any discussions on the balloon? Okay, why don't we, since we didn't acknowledge the first part of it, why don't we re-adopt the balloon? Gossage moves, Olson seconds. Now we're back on the base bill, so a motion to pass it out favorably. Senator Olson? We probably ought to vote on the balloon. All those in favor of the balloon say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Now we're back on the base bill. Is there a motion to pass it out favorably? Senator Olson? Senator Peck seconds. All right, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Senate Bill 178 is passed out favorably. Okay, now let's turn our attention to Senate Bill 245. That was the securitization bill that we heard earlier. Eileen, can you give us a brief overview?
Yes, do you want me to share the screen and go through it, or do you want me to just do it the old-fashioned way on paper?
However you would prefer to do it is fine with me, but let's talk about the base bill, and then we'll, after that discussion, we can talk about the proposed balloon.
Okay, so Senate Bill 245, in a nutshell, allows the State Corporation Commission to authorize the issuance of energy transition bonds to fund electric public utilities and in their efforts to retire or abandon energy generating facilities. And no securitization statutes are on the books right now, so the bill would create all new law. And then the bill also amends two statutes, KSA 66-1239 and KSA 2020 sub 84-9-109. Those two statutes bring the financing portions into bring the securitization portions of the bill into the security interests provisions of the UCC, and also brings the language pertaining to retiring or abandoning energy generating facility into 66-1239, which is a KCC statute. Sorry. And I can stand for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Eileen. Committee, I'm going to depart from our normal process when we're working bills, because I do acknowledge the fact that we had a lot of conferees at this hearing, and we didn't have an opportunity to ask as many questions as we may have. So I'm going to open it up to Eileen for questions. I'm also going to open it up. We have representatives from Evergy here if you have questions on the base bill. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are those the only two that we can ask questions of at this time? Is that your preference, or?
If there's anyone else in the room that you would like to question, I would be open to it.
Okay. I don't know if they are here, but it would either be for KCC or CURB.
I don't believe either one of them are here.
And if they are not, I'll be happy to. I have a question that I don't honestly care who answers it.
Okay.
Having not served on utilities in the past, I'd been told historically, or maybe even in statute, there is generally a process that's fairly lengthy that's gone through for some type of a legislation such as this for securitization and so forth. Is that true? And I would be curious to know what the process is.
I can tell you my experience only. I don't know that we have anybody. Well, Senator Olson, as a former utilities chair, I've served on utilities. I do know that there have been securitization bills over the last couple of years that have been discussed in both House and Senate. And last year's bill, I can't answer whether it was because because of the COVID and the shutdown early, or what the reason why it didn't make it.
So, but again, back to my question, is there historically a process or something in statute, and that would be something, of course, Eileen could answer, that generally has gone through? I don't know. I just had been told that, and I don't know if everyone is aware, but not everything you hear in the hallways is accurate.
Really?
Well, that's my experience in my last
Darn.
30.
Eileen, is there anything in statute that's different than our normal process?
As far as passing this bill and enacting the statutes, no. I think what Senator Peck might be referring to is the actions of the hearings by the KCC, maybe to set, you know, all the hearings and the rate hearings and so on and so forth that occur after the enactment of the bill and the statutes being on the books. The KCC has an entire process that they go through in order to go to do what they would have to do to issue bonds and run through their process. So they have hearings, they have, you know, their own set of review and petition and, you know, request for public comment and hearings that they go through that can be rather lengthy, that runs after the statute itself.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I guess it just shows a little bit of my ignorance on this topic. That's fine. I don't really have any additional questions other than just I was trying to seek clarification on that.
We have an audience member that has raised his hand. If you're satisfied with the answer you've been given, that's fine.
I honestly, Mr. Chairman, I still am curious if there is historically been a process.
Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Paul Snyder. I represent the Kansas Industrial Consumers Group and Kansans for Lower Electric Rates. Senator, to your question, I think the most analogous example right now would be there is a process that the KCC employs to deal with utility assets that are no longer utilized. There are actually, to step up, there is in statute language that says utilities can only recover costs for assets that are used and useful. There's some interpretations of that, and I will certainly allow Mr. Ives to correct any of this. He's got, you know, greater regulatory experience than I do. But in lieu of taking a strident stance on not letting Evergy recover costs for an asset that have been retired or that are no longer used and useful, the KCC has set up a process that is not in statute, but is, I suppose, now in a couple cases of Evergy's, where they have taken plants, usually they're older units that are gas or oil or coal. Darren could weigh in on that. But what they have done is they have removed that from rate base, set it up in what's called a regulatory account, so Evergy still gets to recover the cost of that, the undepreciated amount of that, but it's kind of off the books scenario, if you will. So there is an existing way to deal with assets that are no longer used and useful. There are at least four units plus the meters that have been treated in such a way. So I think as it relates to securitization, this would be a new path that Evergy could use that may be different than that existing path. I guess one thing I would offer is it's important that we compare the cost benefits of both of those, and this bill doesn't currently do that. Again, I would offer, if Darren has a different response or contrary response, try to answer that the best I could. Thank you.
Chair Longbine and committee, my name is Darren Ives. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Evergy. So agree with a fair amount of what Mr. Snyder said. I mean, I think back to your original question, Senator, that there really is no different process for enacting legislation for utilities. It runs through the building here, comes out of committee, gets enacted into law, and then the commission does have processes that it runs once it's passed out of here, right? They are a creature of statute. So once it comes out, they begin their process. This bill, in fact, would have a period of time where we would have to go in front of the commission, ask for a predetermination process on a retirement, which would run, roughly 6 months. They would make a ruling on that, and then we could ask for securitization under this legislation. That would also run another 135 days. Parties would be a part of that, and the commission would make a ruling on whether or not we could execute on issuing securitized bonds. So there's certainly a lot of process after the fact, but nothing additional that typically gets done during the legislative process for utility bills.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. That pretty much answers my question, because I'd heard the part that they talked about, which is after the fact, so thank you.
Senator Pittman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for being here to answer a few more questions. I'm generally supportive of an alternate measure that can bring savings to our ratepayers out there. I have 2 questions. One is that there's this kind of argument that the transition charges could be applied to every retail customer and are non-bypassable even through these companies that have unique rates. What do you have as a response for that? I mean, basically that we can put these charges on for the bond payments onto everybody, I guess, instead of going through the normal rate process that maybe a unique customer has. Is that a fair critique, or is?
That's a fair question. And you're right. I mean, the general approach when securitization bills have come in across the country is that they really are applicable to all retail customers. I mean, the rationale for that really centers in the requirements of the rating agencies in having some certainty of collectability for the bonds so that you can get the AAA rating on the bonds and get the lower interest rate. In the aspect that you ask around certain customers that may have special contracts or rates, I mean, those customers today are subject to changes in many of the riders that are authorized by the KCC, and they also are subject to general rate changes as we come in, and general rate cases are run in front of the KCC. So it would be nothing new in that regard.
And then the second question is, if we didn't do this, would you close down coal plants even though whether you had securitization or not? Or is that kind of a unknown?
Yeah, so at some point, coal plants, regardless, will kind of run out of operating capability, right? I mean, they've been running for decades, and we have closed some smaller plants in the past, as Mr. Snyder alluded to. I mean, what makes it difficult as you get to these larger facilities that have more dollars still unrecovered. Mr. Casely talked about it last time we were here. I mean, you start depreciating an asset when it comes in service 50 or 60 years ago, but you're always making continual investment, capital investment to operate that facility. So you're always chasing recovery. And at some point, we are incentivized without a tool in the toolbox like this to continue to push to operate those until we get recovery. This tool allows us to find a solution in front of the KCC that can maybe end up in a win-win, get some of those facilities closed a little bit earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
A question that would also apply to your nuclear facilities, and I assume at some point your wind facilities. I mean, there is a useful life on a windmill, I would think also, and so it's not just coal plants, it's all of your assets, including your peaking plant, gas peaking plants, nuclear, the whole works, right?
Absolutely. Rate making works on kind of all those facilities where you're always kind of chasing recovery because you're having to continually invest to keep them in operation while they're operating. And this tool would help transition out of facilities when we have those dollars left to recover.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And no, I've had no experience with this. And so initially I had no questions. I didn't know what I didn't know to be able to ask. I did have some of the same questions that Senator Peck and Senator Pittman had brought up. But I would also say that what I've heard this past week, emails I've received, phone calls, et cetera, have been concerned about the coal plants closing. And also what I've heard is that it's going to raise their rates because of the bonds, and that this seems rushed. It is such a very large bill. It seems like we need to take more time taking a look at this. And so my question is, what about, how's it going to appear on their statement, and how's it going to look if this is something that we have all approved, and then they say, well, wait a minute, this actually raised my rates? Could you address that?
Yes, for sure. So a couple things. I mean, there are 20-plus states out there that have enacted some form of securitization that's been utilized for purposes similar to this, or large events across the country. So I think, it may feel rushed here, but we have worked off of a lot of legislation that has been worked through, enacted, and securitization bonds have been issued under. From a pricing standpoint, that transition charge, if we go through all those processes I talked about in front of the KCC, a predetermination proceeding and then a financing order proceeding, there would be an issuance of those bonds and a transition charge. But again, that will end up replacing the costs that are currently in rates for that facility, which are based on our utility weighted average cost of capital, which will be higher than the cost associated with the bonds. So when the bonds come on, that amount will come out of rates, and there will be a net benefit to customers, or the legislation says if there's not, the KCC won't approve that for us to move forward with securitization. Legislation requires a demonstration that it's just and reasonable and it's providing net benefits to customers.
Thank you for that answer, and if I may, Mr. Chair, I understood that there, in the original testimony, that there might be some form of an amendment that might cauterize that more within the amendment or within the bill, that you would be, that the institute or the energy company would be held accountable if the rates were not lower. Is that coming forth or no?
Yeah, so a couple things. I don't want to jump in front of go ahead,
Okay.
Chairman.
I do have a large balloon, so what I would prefer to do is if you have questions on the base bill, we can answer those. If we've satisfied those, then we do have a pretty extensive balloon that is an agreement between KCC and Evergy that I think will answer some of your other concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
Could I answer one more question? I don't think I answered your question about concerns about the retirement of coal. And I wanted to answer that because this bill really is about creating an option for a way to move forward with retirements. It doesn't require retirements. It doesn't require transition. It just says if we work in front of the KCC through all these proceedings I talked about, and it's deemed the right decision to retire a facility, then we can utilize this securitization to lower costs to customers and move.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, committee, we do have a balloon. Okay, Eileen, let's start off with an motion to pass the bill out favorably so that we can then discuss them. Senator Olson moves, Dietrich seconds. Discussion. Eileen, can you take us through the balloon, please?
I sure can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, let me just state that the balloon is lengthy because the bill took quite a long time to draft, and because of the deadline to get this turned in, the review period was a little less than optimal. So the folks from Evergy worked with me to get the bill reviewed after the fact. So some of these amendments are purely of a corrective nature, and some of them were truly amendatory. So with that in mind, on page 1, in the definition for adjustment mechanism, we're striking in line 15 and 16 the language that says, and subject to timely review to confirm compliance. And then in line 17, after energy transition charges, we're inserting language that says, subject to timely commission review to confirm compliance. And my understanding is that is because when I was rewording and drafting to make it sound better, I inadvertently messed with the timing process of how things worked with the commission, and they wanted me to correct that. So that is purely something that is process driven and of a corrective nature there. The second amendment that you see, adjustment mechanisms are, we're changing that to the singular form instead of the plural. So we're going to place the adjustment mechanism is and replace that language there. On page 2, in paragraph 10, we're merging subclauses at 1 and 2. So we're going to strike that semicolon in line 37 and strike the designation of subclause 2 and the quote pre-tax, and then say, as used in this paragraph, quote pre-tax, and just kind of merge that all together. And then running into page 3 on line 8, we're going to change the Roman 3 designation to a Roman 2 designation because we merged the first 2 together. So that would put us with 2. And then we're striking coal-fired because my understanding from Evergy is that they no longer have coal-fired electric generating plants. And so with that, we have to insert an "and" to make the sentence work correctly. In the definition of energy transition property, in line 17, after the "or," we need to insert assignee of the electric public.
Eileen, you've muted
I
again.
did it again. I know, I did it again. Assignee of the electric public utility. That was missed language, so we needed to insert that. Then we're going to jump all the way to page 8. And I believe this is the language that Senator Gossage was looking for. This is the amendment that the folks from Evergy and the KCC were working on together. A little bit of how to read this. If you go back to page 7 in line 5, all those items in subsection D, so numbers 1 through 13 are all items that are included in the financing order that the commission issues. So we're adding one more. With the financing order, the commission needs to include provisions that specify the timing of rate making and regulatory accounting actions required by the financing order to protect the interests of customers and utilities which shall be limited to the following requirements that, to the extent that the commission, so A says, has issued an order granting predetermination, prescribing rate-making parameters and regulatory accounting for retirement or abandonment of electric utility generating assets or for the addition of facilities in connection with the retirement or abandonment of the subject electric utility generating assets. The electric utility shall be permitted to implement and effectuate such rate-making parameters or regulatory accounting mechanisms. And B is if the commission has not issued the order granting predetermination, then the commission shall address such matters. And let me go back and say, if the commission has not issued an order granting predetermination, prescribing rate-making parameters or regulatory accounting to credit the customers with benefits from the retirement of the subject electric utility generating assets, then the commission will address the matter in the financing order and customers will receive the benefits as determined by the commission order simultaneously with the inception of the collection of the energy transition charges. The next amendment that we'll see it.
Eileen, can I interrupt you
Yes.
for just a second?
Absolutely.
So, committee, this is the amendment that was discussed and was agreed upon since the time we've heard the bill between Evergy and KCC. So the amendment makes it clear in the second paragraph that the customers will be credited with the benefits of the retired generating assets at the same time as the energy transition charge begins to appear on their bills. So you're going to have an energy charge or a transition charge, but you're going to have reduction of the retiring asset. It also requires the commission to decide how those benefits will be credited to the customers in the financing order unless the commission has already prescribed how that will occur in the resolution of the predetermined proceeding with respect to the generating assets to be retired that must be completed before securitization application can be filed with the electric utility. There's another explanation, and it's my understanding that KCC and Evergy are both in support of that particular part of the balloon. So, Eileen, you can continue.
Let me also jump in on the tail end of your statement, Mr. Chair, and that is that I believe Senator Gossage was asking about how could the customers tell what the charges were, and the answer to that is in new section 4. That section describes explicitly how the energy transition charges appear on a customer's bill. So that language is available there. The next amendment that we have is on page 14, and starting on line 35 all the way through, and let me also say at the top of line at the top of page 15, it shows subsections F and G not being stricken. They actually should be stricken. All the way through page 17 at the end of line 12, all of that language is being stricken. I was actually provided with a duplicate section and I drafted it, gosh darn it. And as such, Evergy has asked me to strike it. So it's gone, and that'll actually reduce the length of the bill, and we're all in favor of that. But that'll still remain new section 7 of the bill. So after striking all that, subsection F will actually become subsection A, and then we'll redesignate subsection G to be B, and H will be subsection C, and we'll go onward. we're almost done. And on page 21 and 22, this is purely language that was missed. I think this was towards the end of my second all-nighter when I wasn't seeing quite straight. So I was missing some of the language that was being inserted. On page 21 in line 25, we're saying prior to the undertaking the construction of or participation in a generating facility or prior to entering into a new contract, or we're inserting, or prior to retiring or abandoning a generating facility or within a reasonable time after retirement or abandonment, if filing before retirement or abandonment is not possible under the circumstances. And then jumping back into the language that's in the bill, a public utility may file with the commission and go on with the language that is in. In line 34, we're adding retiring and then adding or abandoning. And then in line 36, retirement or abandonment, you're going to see a trend here. On page 22, in line 14, retired or abandoned, we're adding or abandoned. In line 18, in line 26, we're adding or abandoned. In line 31, the public utility shall have 1 year from the effective date of the determination of the commission to notify the commission whether it will construct or participate in the construction of the generating or transmission facility, or whether it will perform under the terms of the contract, or whether it will retire or abandon the generating facility. We're adding that last little bit at the end. In line 35, again, perform under the terms of the contract, or that it will not retire or abandon the generating facility. It's the flip side of the coin of subsection D. And then last but not least, in line 42, subsection F says, if the public utility notifies the commission under subsection D that it will construct or participate in a generating facility or purchase power contract and subsequently does not, or that it will retire or abandon a generating facility and subsequently does not, we're adding that language. And then going on, it will be required to notify the commission immediately and file an alternative supply plan. And we go on with the commission per subsection C within 90 days. And that is it. With that, Mr. Chair, I can stand for questions on the
Eileen.
balloon.
Any other questions on the balloon? Senator Hildebrand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Eileen, I'm sure there's probably a good explanation, and it's not what I am thinking, but whenever I see the word abandon or abandoning, it reminds me of a zombie movie where they're walking and you see this dilapidated building in the back. I'm assuming that's not what that means. Can you clarify when a utility abandons a facility, what that means, or what it looks like after they're abandoned it?
You know, I actually see, Friday the 13th and Jason running around with his knife when I see abandoned. But notwithstanding that mental picture, I think one of the other individuals in the room there can actually help out with that, because I am provided the language and I'm not quite sure what abandoned means. I have an idea of what it means, but I'm sure somebody else there can actually give a much better answer.
Give us an explanation.
Thank you, Chairman. Darren Ives with Evergy again. It's a nuanced term, right? But there are some activities that come with retirement in terms of, potentially you start to bring down facilities and return to kind of a green space. And abandonment is more where you make it cold, dark, and safe, and you have security around the site, but you haven't started that work. it's the same effect from the terms of securitization in terms of it's not really being used and useful for utility service anymore, and it would be eligible to apply for securitization on. But it's not zombie apocalypse. It's not, it will maintain it and take care of it regardless of whether you start to tear it down or not.
Questions on the balloon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since he's up here, I've had thoughts so I wouldn't forget this here. I wanted to know, is there any cost for early payoff? You know, whatever we're into on the old facility that we're going to go in and do the new stuff. Is there anything that's written out there where there's any cost that associate with that movement?
In terms of an early payoff of?
Early payoff or anything like that?
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, we have a lot of long-term financing, both from a debt and equity standpoint, that funds investments in the utility, right? And that would persist and would be used for other purposes as we get money back from securitization bonds. The securitization bonds, when they get set, certainly will have a term associated with them and some obligations to have those charges until we repay those.
Thank you, Derek. Are there additional questions on the balloon itself? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am sorry, but the answer that was given to Senator Hildebrand, I missed something here, because I'm on the word abandoned. Is there a period of time that, because abandoned to me is like walk off and leave it and never walk back. So again, back to that definition that was referenced, and I don't have a problem with a facility that's being retired, being abandoned, maybe even secured, as you said, a fence around it. But is there a period of time? In other words, is there somewhere in statute or who has oversight to make certain that a utility doesn't just abandon a site forever or indefinitely?
Yeah, so I think that varies a little bit different, a little bit differently by jurisdiction, but in general, there are obligations for sure for us from an environmental standpoint related to sites, obligations for us to secure facilities. To your point, even if we don't, tear them down and go back to green space immediately, we got to have fences up, we got to have security, whether it be cameras, physical, or both. We got to make sure everything is tightened up and ready to go. There's not a specific time frame to do that, but certainly, we've been around for 100+ years, and our obligations to our sites, go back that long, right? And will continue.
I appreciate that and understand that, but this bill doesn't, I don't see anywhere in here, and I haven't read the whole balloon, I don't see the word Evergy in here. So I'm not only talking about your company, but future companies and other utilities. But so if that's the best answer. I do have a question, Mr. Chairman, for the reviser. If I can find back to page 15, we were told, and we see the striking starting on 14, and that's, sorry, one thing I try to do when I'm looking at legislation or amendments, I read what's being stricken to see if it should indeed be stricken or not. But my question is the part on page 15, the first two paragraphs or the first 14 lines, is that supposed to have red lines through it?
Yes, I stated that it is supposed to be stricken.
Okay, I'm sorry, what I heard was F and G were to be stricken, but not necessarily, and just those letters, not necessarily all the words. So all the words.
Subsections, yeah, all the language in subsections F and subsection G.
From subsection E on 14, clear through page 15,
Clear
16.
through page 17 on line 12.
Okay. All right. That's what I thought, but that's the reason I raised my hand while she was talking. Thank you.
Additional questions on the balloon? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eileen, could you explain to us, and I agree with Senator Peck, I'm always looking at why was it stricken? Can you explain to us why this large section was stricken?
Because the language was a duplication of provisions that are already in the bill.
Okay. And where would we find those provisions?
Pretty much right after the fact.
I see. So this was, you were saying a human error in that it was inserted, but should not have been, so then it was stricken? Is that what I'm understanding?
Right, I was given two of the same provisions and I drafted
I
them
see.
twice.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, is there a motion on the amendment? Olson moves, Pittman seconds. Any further discussion? Senator Peck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm must be slow. I don't understand utilities very well at all, and I'm struggling with the bill originally, struggling with the amendment for certain, and then we had so many opposition conferees. I'm curious,
We only had one opposition.
were they all neutral then?
We had
A slew of neutral? Okay. Thank you for that correction. Do we know, are they happy now? And I don't want each one of them to testify. That's not the case at all.
They have not approached, the opposition has not approached me concerning this. I do know that this is worked on between Evergy and KCC.
Right.
I know they are both in agreement on language, and particularly on page 8.
Well, I understand and appreciate that part, but that's two entities or two portions. Mr. Chairman, I'm not really wanting to end or stop 245, but I'm not comfortable with moving forward quickly on this. My recollection was Mr. Casely indicated that this year would be great, but if we don't, it's fine. I would like to see us ask leadership to bless the bill so it stays alive and we can continue to work on it after turnaround. That way, it would give myself, the rest of the committee members, an opportunity to fully digest, understand, and those who have contacted us, because I don't know about anyone else on the committee, but I have been contacted multiple times by numerous entities that they think that we need to slow the process down a little bit, which I'm good with because it doesn't end it, doesn't stop it. And so I'm going to make a substitute motion to table Senate Bill 245 with the understanding that I will, and I would ask the chair to ask leadership to bless the bill so it stays alive, so we can continue to move forward on 245 as we have a level of comfort. So that would be a motion that I would make at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Peck, you're getting a little ahead of me. So what leadership has asked me to do is to adopt the balloon if the committee agrees to that. We are not going to pass the bill out today. We are going to let it lay over. The reason for that is we were in discussions yesterday about whether securitization could possibly help with our emergency crisis with natural gas. Those discussions need to continue today, and decisions need to be made whether that's a part of this bill or whether that would be a separate bill. So what you're asking for in your substitute motion is already in motion.
Okay.
So
I would withdraw my motion then.
my preference would be to adopt the balloon so that we can give comfort to the agreement that ratepayers will see benefit to this. And then we can continue to explore the other avenues, and the bill will come back to us to be worked at the appropriate time.
I'm fine with that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that explanation.
Senator Gossage?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just very quickly, I see 3 opponent testimonies here, and I'm trying to understand, because sometimes we use acronyms, and I'm not sure which one of those 3 said that they were in agreement with the balloon.
Sorry, you are correct. I stand corrected. We only had one oral opponent, but we did have two written.
And which did you say were in agreement with the balloon or discussed?
KCC and Evergy are the ones that worked on the balloon.
And so KCC is not any of these that are the opponents, correct?
They are not.
Okay. So I would,
Pittman?
yes.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to go ahead and move this amendment.
We've already moved the amendment.
Oh, yeah.
so. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay, we will carry this over, and once I get some direction from leadership on how they would like to move forward, we will do that. My intention was to work Senate Bill 37 today, but we are out of time, and so we will change our agenda for tomorrow. We will work 37 first, and then if we have time, we will hear Senate Bill 199 afterwards. With that, we're adjourned.